Well, I thought what I would do is I'll give you a summary of what I'm going to talk about, which is number one, and most people probably don't realize this. I mean, what God is doing right now in the United States is, well, it's never happened in the history of the United States. And most of what I'm talking about, you probably haven't even heard of. So if you see a lot of bad news, which I know you do, there's some really incredibly good things happening. God is on the move in ways that most people don't realize right now. So I'm going to try to do that real quick. And then when I get through that, I'll try to talk about, because when Tom and Mark and everybody asked me to talk, they said, we like to tell some war stories about your work and what you do, but also, how the Lord interacts with that. So I thought I'd just think through maybe 3 or 4 principles that were really important to me in sort of, building this organization in the years that I think would be appropriate for anybody trying to run their business according to their faith, and just throw those out to see if any of those happen to be ones the Lord really has on your heart to follow. But let me start with the basics, because there's people in here who probably don't even know what First Liberty is. First Liberty is the largest legal organization in the country that all we do is religious freedom. So if you're a 5-year-old girl and your name is Gabriela Perez, and you're caught praying over your meal in the lunch cafeteria and told it's not good to pray at school, and you're a poor family, you live outside of Orlando, Florida, what do? I mean, you can't exactly take a couple $100,000 out and go hire a legal team. So we come in, we bring the best litigators in the country, they all donate their time, so that when Gabriela wins her case, which we did win the case for Gabriela, we don't just win for Gabriela, but we set a precedent that protects all of our kids and our grandkids. And that's really the basics of what we do. And the first thing I always like to do is talk about why that's important. Number one, what if you're not a person of faith? Is it important? It's crucially important. The founders called this our first freedom because they understood if you lose this freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. And, I could give you lots of examples. In fact, I will in just a second. But the reason that that's true is, and I find that people of faith really don't get this. They think, I want religious freedom because I want the ability to live my faith. It's so much bigger than that. And the reason for this is the one thing that a totalitarian regime will never allow are citizens with an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever you see that type of oppression coming in, the first flashpoint is always going to be religious freedom. And if you lose there, you'll lose everything else. Your financial freedoms, your political freedom, you'll lose everything. And we've got a lot of people supporting us around the country who aren't even people of faith. They just came from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, you name it, and they saw it. And they're supporting us. I'm thinking of a guy right now who came up to me afterwards and said, I'm not a person of faith. He said, but I think that what you guys are doing is the most important thing anybody's doing in this country. And he handed me a check for $5,000, and he said, I'm going to be supporting you from now on. He said, in my country, I watched them take down their religious symbols, and 2 weeks later, we all lost our political freedoms. And this is a guy that every few months sends in money, and he's not a person of faith. He just wants his freedom. And boy, have we seen that, right? What happened in COVID? Well, what happens when you give mayors, governors power that they've never had before? What's the flashpoint that happened? What was the big legal case? It was the churches and the synagogues being shut down all over the country, right? It's okay to go into Home Depot, but you can't go into the synagogue or the church. Well, that makes sense. Didn't exactly work out well for the government in court on those, but it just shows you the flashpoint. The flashpoints right now, we've got huge cases, which I'm going to talk about, one with the military and one with businesses. And the key to freedom in both these cases these are religious liberty cases. This is just the way it works. So if you're a person who cares about freedom, even if you're an atheist, you should fight to the death over the right of people to hold to their faith and their conscience, because this is the key to everything else. So that being the case, how are we doing? Well, I mean, I don't have to convince you probably that the attacks are just proliferating everywhere, right? I mean, I could talk all day. I think, I forget how many we had. I think 2 years ago we had 311 legal matters. Last year we had 608. I mean, it's just increasing, and they're all across the board, all kinds of different ones. Take schools. We just finished a case a few months ago. I'd say a case. It was real quick. A little kid, they were told they were doing face paint at school. But one little kid was told he had to rub off the cross that was on his face because it was religious. And, well, let's just say they've apologized to the kids and they won't be doing that anymore. But this is the kind of stuff happening all over. We're about to argue a case at the Federal Court of Appeals. 2 Christian schools in the state championship of football in Florida were told that they could not have a prayer before their football game. Why not? Because the Florida High School Athletic Association said, you can't do it because these are government microphones. Oh, well, I was unaware that if you mention Jesus on a government microphone, there's a nuclear explosion, right? But this is what they were scared of. So you can't, so it's a government microphone. So I can't say something about my faith on a public sidewalk or in a park or where, what other public places do you want to take away my First Amendment rights? Well, believe it or not, district court didn't see any problem with that under the First Amendment. So we're going to be at the Federal Court of Appeals in a couple of months arguing over, by the way, this stadium where they held this state championship in football is where the Billy Graham Crusade was held 40 years ago. But now you can't have 2 Christian schools have a prayer before their football game. We've got, I'm thinking of different cases, churches and synagogues. I mean, I could go on all day about all the cases we have. We just finished a case out in San Diego where Awakened Church wanted to have a Christmas setting, and they needed something bigger than their church because they get all their campuses together at this one. And they had a big Christmas program. They're going to use the symphony. It's a beautiful facility. They put in to rent it like everybody else. And at the end of the process, when they said, okay, yeah, that's a fair price, we'll do that, they said, wait, you're a church? And they said, yeah, we're a church. They said, oh, we don't rent to churches or religious organizations. So fortunately, the pastor, his father was from East Germany, so he doesn't like communism or attacks on freedom. So the pastor called me and said, this doesn't seem right. And I said, no, it violates California law, state law, federal law. And so we sent him a letter and said, hey, you can either follow the law or we can have a federal judge help you with the process. And they decided they'd rather follow the law. So they had their big Christmas celebration in the Ratty Shell, which is the big symphony hall there. And they had over 14,000 people. And they said they'd had so many hundreds of people accept the Lord that they couldn't even count them. But they were being fought. Why? Because they were being told they couldn't even rent because they're a church, right? Synagogue cases. I mean, I could give you endless. We have one, Chabad on the Beaches, which is outside in New York. And this is a synagogue. There was a facility sitting there open for 2.5 months for sale until the Jewish synagogue bought it. And then immediately the city said, oh, wait, we need that for eminent domain. We're going to use it. We're going to take it from you. We're going to take your worship facility from you. And we said, no, you're not. And a federal judge has now issued an injunction that you can't come and take their synagogue away because you now want their synagogue. What was their great, important public purpose? That they were going to take their house of worship from them? Because they were going to train lifeguards in that building. Like they couldn't do that in another building. So just stuff you can't even imagine, right? That you wouldn't think of in the past. And we got so many cases right now. The area is the marketplace, is where the cases are really mounting. And that is, I could give you endless ones. Valerie Klosterman's a great example of so many of these. Worked at her business as a physician's assistant for 20 years. Impeccable record until the University of Michigan Medical took over this other medical, and all of a sudden she's called into the DEI office, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and asked to sign things that violate her faith. And she's like, this doesn't have anything to do with my work. I can't sign these things. They violate my faith. Well, so they called her evil and fired her after 20 years. Common across the country, right? Well, you can't do that. There's religious freedom in the workplace. In fact, we've got a case at the Supreme Court that they just took 3 weeks ago that we'll be arguing in April that I think is going to actually expand protections in the workplace for religious freedom in ways we haven't seen in 46 years. But it's always been the law. It's always been something we've respected in this country. It should be about your work product, not that we're gonna fire you because you don't have the current politically correct or woke views that violate your faith. I mean, this is what America's about, having the ability to believe your own beliefs and to do good work and to still get a paycheck for your family. And in military, I mean, again, I could give you lots of cases. We're arguing a week from today at the Federal Court of Appeals in New Orleans, the Navy SEALs case. These are 35 Navy SEALs who have given about 350 years of combat service for our country, many of them suffering in certain ways, but these particular 35 had religious objections to taking the COVID vaccine. Well, there's a process in the military that says if you have a religious objection to something, you can ask for an accommodation. There's a process that the military is supposed to go through, and only if there's no way to accommodate them do they deny that. Well, instead of going through the process, the military decided that they would just punish anybody who asked for a religious accommodation, which is a direct violation of federal law. One of the guys, for instance, is on his way to his PTSD appointment, and they called the doctor and said, don't see him. Okay, they've ripped away medical insurance for their disabled children. They've stopped their pensions. This is all stuff that's illegal. As soon as we got into court, I mean, it was not pretty for the government. We proved that they were just denying everybody across the country. If they had their way, they would throw out 30,000, 40,000 military families. At the very time when we're struggling to get people to enlist into the military. It's a really horrible thing, what they've been doing. The good news is we've won. We've got, in fact, we not only won on the Navy SEALs, we expanded this into a class action. Every person in the Navy is protected right now. About 5,000 people they were in the process of trying to throw out of the Navy. Some of our very best. I mean, people who train at, and we've got Air Force cases, there's a Marine case, there's cases across the board where we're having to protect people. So that argument will be next week, and it'll be a really important case, not only for everybody in the military and just the right not to be discriminated against because you're a person of faith. Most people join the military, all the studies show, because of their faith. The idea that you're going to push people of faith out is a really bad idea, and punish them for asking for if you can possibly have an accommodation for something that is a serious issue to their faith. This goes back, by the way. I don't know if any of you ever saw, what was the name of that movie that Mel Gibson did? No, not that one. The one, Hacksaw Ridge. It's a great story of a famous guy who was I think a Seventh-day Adventist, and he couldn't carry a weapon. And so he said, I'll just be a medic. I'd love to be a medic. And, well, they didn't want it. They said, no, you got to carry a weapon. And they tried to court-martial the guy. They went through all kinds of stuff. They treated him horribly. And he won, though. He won because we have a legal system. And he ended up being in one of the most bloody battles we had in World War II. And so many people died. He had to go up a cliff to get on the battlefield. And he was because of his faith, life was so precious to him that he crawled back up when the enemy had already taken over that land. And one by one, he dragged off soldiers who were bleeding. And he tied a rope around him, and he would put them down. And he would pray, God, just give me one more. And he went back over and over until he saved 70 people's lives. And then he made it down. He made it alive, which is a miracle. And he ended up winning a Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, you miss out on people that have different beliefs who offer something special when you engage in discrimination and refuse to accommodate people of religion that want to serve, that want to give everything they have. And you're saying, no, if you're different, you're out. It's a big mistake. So this is a really important argument next Monday. I think we're going to win, and I think we'll win all the way to the Supreme Court. But it's important for what it does for our military, because right now people aren't wanting to join the military because of a lot of this stuff that's going on. And if they know there's protection, they can be who they are, they can serve fully, it'll make a big difference. I'm telling you a lot of bad stuff, so you're like, oh gosh, thanks for the depressing luncheon with Toolbox. So the good news is we have a method of dealing with this. We've been doing it for years, and it's working. And that is, if you look at a normal nonprofit, left wing or right wing, what their method is raise as much money as you can raise, use that money to hire as many attorneys as you can, put them in an office in D.C. or L.A. or New York, and then fly them around the country and cover as many of your issues as you can cover. That's not our model. Our model is there's all these people of faith who went to law school because they wanted to stand for what was right. 30 years later, these are the best litigators of the best law firms in the country, really the best law firms in the world. And they've done honorable work for people who've paid them, but they've never gotten to do a case for their faith or their country. And so we sit down with these and we say, look, If we give you everything you need, on our staff we have number one in their class from Harvard, Chicago, all the best law schools, and all they do is religious freedom. And we've got a media team that'll come around you. So if we give you what you need, are you willing to bring your firm and yourself on one of these cases? And they're like, man, I've been waiting my whole life, And he said, sign me up. And you can imagine for the first time in their life, after 30 years, 35 years, first time in their life, all their talent, their gifts, their training is lined up with their faith, their love for their country. Never felt that before. It's really unfair, but now we know we have them for the rest of our lives as one of our volunteer attorneys because they're going to have another one of these. And they give cover to the younger attorneys who get to work on these cases and donate their time. And so most of the big law firms don't just donate their time. They'll literally fight each other at time over who gets to donate their time on the cases. The result of this is twofold. Number one, and this is the original thought I had, is I thought we can get a lot more bang for our buck as a nonprofit. And sure enough, every case, every 100,000 we spend, we get about 600,000 donated. So it's like a 6-to-1 leveraging of resources, which is great. But what I didn't count on was the win-loss ratio. And that is, if you watch legal nonprofits, I mean, they're created to fight some big problem, industry, something. And so if they win 40% of their cases, they're doing really well. Our win rate now, 23 years in a row, every single year has been above 90%. And that's, God's grace and his favor, but it's also his method of using his people that are all around the country with these great gifts and are not being allowed to give them for the kingdom. And now they are. And it's fun to watch. You get people who could never afford these attorneys, getting the most high-powered attorneys in the world. You get attorneys who are dying, ready to just give up because they're so tired of just doing the normal rat race cases, finally getting to work on something that matters. And the result are victories and precedents that are protecting everybody of faith in the country. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Now, normally, I would end there and I'd say, yeah, we got a lot more battles, but we're winning, so all's good. But then about, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I guess, something started to change. And really what that was we were getting ready for pushing religious freedom under a Hillary Clinton presidency, and then this Donald Trump guy won. And we were like, okay, we'd evaluated how we're going to push religious freedom here, but let's reevaluate. And we immediately saw these judicial seats open. So we really felt God calling us, pushing us. You need to vet. You need to do a good job making sure everybody knows who the judicial choices are so that good choices can be made, to put good people in the court who will be the right kind of judges. Not activist judges, but judges who will actually restrain themselves, follow the law, and follow the Constitution. And so we did that. And boy, the result was incredible. We created really, I think, the best vetting division in the country. And the result of the judges who got on the court are none like anything we've ever seen, really. When you look at the qualification level, the age, the commitment to a proper approach to the Constitution, we've never seen anything like it. And as you do that, it starts to change the opinions that are coming out. And so, the best example I can give you of this are, we just had 2 wins at the Supreme Court last summer. And by the way, because people don't get this always, what I just said is so ridiculous. There's 8,000 requests a year. They took 67 cases out of 8,000 last year. I mean, if my goal was for them to take 2 cases, that would have been a stupid goal. That doesn't happen. Well, we didn't get 2 cases. We got 2 wins within 6 days of each other. Only God could do that. And it tells you that something's going on here, that there's a move going on. And these cases are both really significant. The Carson case, this is a case out of Maine where they said, look, most of our school districts don't have public schools, so you can pick a public school and just use your money and pick whatever school, public or private, you want to pick anywhere in the state, even out of state. They've done that for over 100 years. But then they decided, we're going to change something. We're going to keep this, you can choose any private school you want, but we're going to exclude any school that teaches anything religious. Well, at the Supreme Court, we won a decision that says you can't do that. You can't tell parents they can't choose that education and discriminate against all the religious schools if they're teaching all the other secular subjects. And so what we have now is a precedent that will say from now on in the future of the country, whenever you have any school choice program, you have to allow parents to pick amongst all the private schools. You can't open up to some and not the other because you don't like religion. So big victory. It'll make a big choice in the school choice movement, certainly, but it'll make a big choice to a lot of these local schools that now can come into existence because they can actually compete and participate in the programs. But the other case is the big case, and that's the Coach Kennedy case. And a lot of you probably know about Coach Kennedy. Coach was in the Marines for 20 years, got out, saw this movie, Facing the Giants, as he was going into his first coaching job. And in that movie, these coaches would pray at the end of every game. And he thought, you know, I've never done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. So, God, I'm making a pledge to you that after every game, after the game's over, I'm going to go to a knee, and I'm going to thank you for the privilege of coaching these young men. And for 7 years, that's what he did. You know, people are at the middle of the field, they're picking up their cell phones, they're making reservations for dinner, they're slapping each other on the behind, they're talking to friends, and he's going to a knee for 20 to 30 seconds. Well, after 7 years, somebody told the superintendent, hey, it's pretty cool what your coach does. And he's like, what do you mean? And next thing you know, they were opening an investigation, and then Coach Kennedy was told, if you go to a knee again, you're going to be fired. And Coach went to a knee, and he was fired. And 7 years of litigation later, we won at the Supreme Court that they cannot bother Coach Kennedy when he goes to a knee to pray after the football game. And that's what most people know, that in March, Coach will go back to his job from which he was fired. And this fall, there'll probably be 1,000 TV cameras as after the game he goes to a knee. That's what most people know. What happened is so much bigger than that because within the decision, there was a major precedent reversal. And that is there's a case that goes back 50 years called Lemon. What Lemon said is, you know, we know there's this establishment clause because the founders didn't want us to have a nationally established church that we would have to support, and then that would take away from our freedom. But we think it goes much further than that. And so we think it means separation of church and state, that wherever government is, religion can't be. And of course, government's everywhere. We think it means that if you're offended by religion, you can bring a lawsuit. You can't bring a lawsuit because you're offended. Only in the last 50 years, if you're offended by religion, would you see those. So our whole lives, we've seen attacks against, a Ten Commandments monument, or a nativity scene at Christmas, or a menorah, or, if there's any sort of religious activity at a school, there's a panic like the school's on fire. Why? Because any of that's in the Constitution? No. Because of this case called Lemon, aptly named, by the way. And so 3 years ago, we were at the Supreme Court in the Bladensburg Cross case. This is a veterans memorial that was put up 100 years ago by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And the American Humanists came along, brought a lawsuit, said you can't have this big memorial cross because it violates the Lemon case. And so we went to the Supreme Court, and we won the case 7-2, but more importantly, 5-4, the 5 majority refused to follow Lemon. They didn't reverse it, but they refused to follow it. And so, I said to our staff, I said, look, this is a big crack in the armor, but we're going to have to fight for probably 10 or 15 years to drag this into all the other areas of society where this hostility to religion approach is still being used with Lemon until we get rid of Lemon someday. And all of a sudden, we've got the Coach Kennedy case at the Supreme Court. And we're looking at this and we're saying, there's never been a case ever at our Supreme Court on the rights of either teachers or coaches with regard to their faith at school. This is going to affect millions and millions and millions of people. If we go for the get rid of Lemon argument, that's like going for a grand slam when we could just get a single and win the game, and it might risk our case. So we can't do that. So we didn't push that argument. So midway through the oral argument, out of nowhere, both Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch start saying in the argument, I think it's time we get rid of Lemon. And our eyes are like as big as silver dollars. We're going, what? And we're waiting for the opinion. I'm sitting with Coach Kennedy, and the opinion comes down, and he said, did I win? And we're like, yeah, you won. We're reading. And we're reading along, and about page 3 or 4, it says Lemon's over. And the dissent's going crazy, okay? Lemon was cited 7,000 times in the last 50 years by cases. All those, the case they were cited is now overruled. Everywhere they took crosses down, the crosses go back up. Everywhere they took 10 Commandments out, they go back in. Everywhere they took prayer out, it goes back in. Everything just changed. The problem is people don't know. It's like when you've been trained for 50 years to be sort of cringing at religion, then it's hard to get you out of the fact, no, you're free. And so, my picture in my brain is it's like they've had our children or our grandchildren held captive in a castle, and God just like dynamited open a hole in the wall. And we're all sitting at the hole going, wow, look at that hole. We got to go through the hole. And so one of the things we're doing is really trying to educate people. And we got a campaign called Restoring Faith in America that people can, in their own communities, go. You can have a prayer at your school board meeting. We're getting great pictures. It's fascinating, by the way, this all happened before the Buffalo Bills thing. We started getting pictures all over the country of kids from both teams and coaches. They asked the coach to join them, joining after a game and praying together. And everybody saw what happened with the Buffalo Bills in that game. And we're seeing this start to revive, start to come. When you talk about changing the country, this is not tearing statues down. This is pulling them back up. This is going back to who we are as a country. So, I could go on, but I'll just say we've got a big case we're arguing in April. I think it's going to be a huge case for religious freedom in the workplace. There's a really bad case. It's 46 years old that has really eviscerated most of the protection in the workplace. And there's 5 justices who in opinions have said it needs to be revisited. We just teed it up for them, and they just took it. So the odds are high that they're about to rule our way. We'll find out by the end of June. And if so, at the very time when a lot of these woke corporations are starting to really crush people of faith in a way that violates the law, we're about to get new protection for people in the workplace, which I think is going to be really important. So I would just say this. Every American alive right now has more religious freedom than they've ever had in their lifetime. And we are just beginning. I'm telling you, as all this darkness is going on around America, there's one place that there's light, and I'm telling you, it's where we are right now. Because stuff that I never thought possible, I'm watching happen. And we're just at the beginning of this. So let me end with a few things, and I'm going to show you a quick video. I thought, well, what are the big lessons that I've learned, just in doing my work that I thought were important to me? One would be is if you're going to have influence, it's to live out of your gifts. Everybody wants to know God's will. But the most specific, particularized expression of his will he will ever show you is how he made you. What do people say you're really good at? And you say, oh, that's easy. Well, it's easy because you're really good at it. What are the things that are your areas of giftedness? And people all the time tell us, don't do that. Do something else. That's going to make more money. That's going to give you more success. I think that's actually not true. I think you're more successful when you live out of your gifts. Back when I was in high school, I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking, and I thought I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people said, well, that's like a God or Satan choice, isn't it, to be a pastor or a lawyer? And I analyzed my DNA, and I thought I would probably do better at dispensing justice rather than mercy, so I'd probably make a better lawyer than a pastor. And, I got out. I clerked for a federal judge, as Mark mentioned, and you had all these offers, and I just thought, gosh, I don't feel like that's what I'm supposed to do. And I remember thinking, well, what do you want to do? And I thought, well, I love to do cases and religious freedom, but I'd love to represent pastors and churches and religious freedoms and our founding principles, and I'd even like to go to seminary. And I laughed because there was no job like that. And 2 weeks later, 2 big partners in big law firms in Dallas, I never met these guys, called me and invited me to lunch. And they said, look, we started donating our time for religious freedom, and we're getting so many calls, it's hurting our ability to make a living. We were wondering, would you be willing to come on, do legal cases, help pastors, churches, religious freedoms, and our founding principles, and you can even go to seminary part-time if you want to. Now, being in my mid-20s, a little immature in my faith, I said, let me pray about it, like that wasn't the answer to prayer, right? Next day I said yes, and they paid me what I was making starting out at the clerk's office, which at that time was $28,000 a year, and we started a nonprofit. And 33 and a half years later, First Liberty is now the largest legal organization in the country that all we do is religious freedom. It didn't even exist back then. But, 5, 6 years later, I'm walking out of the Supreme Court, and there's a cache of microphones at the bottom of the steps, and before I stepped down to go to those steps, my wife said, this is what you were born to do. And I just thought, I'd have missed all of that if I would have listened to what everybody told me. hey, you can go make a lot more money at one of these law firms. Or you can do this. Why are you doing this? Why you go work at a nonprofit? So I just say live out of your gifts. Don't be discouraged away from whatever your gifted areas are. But number two, I don't think you're going to have influence if you live out of your gifts if you're not willing to walk with courage. The go along, get along thing, is not going to be the recipe. Whatever your gifts are, when you start to exercise them, the enemy will always try to intimidate you to not do that. And if you stop there, you'll never experience what God really has for you. And boy, we've seen this. I've seen it over and over again. I mentioned the judges thing. Well, we had a huge influence on judges. And I tell you, though, when we felt like God was calling us to do it, we got threatened from people in D.C., top people on my staff. Don't do this. We could be destroyed because we're now messing in other people's pool. It's like, you know what? This is what God's called us to do. If God wants to destroy us, we're his. We're going to follow what God tells us to do. And the blessing that followed, you don't probably know this, but the number one and number two choices that were supposed to replace Scalia, we went to the White House and said, have you read this opinion? And we watched their hair light on fire. Okay? They didn't pick one or two because we showed them one or two. And then even the one they chose, we said, great, on all these issues, on this issue, you've got an issue. Well, they got real mad at us. And then 6 months in, as the new justice, guess what came out of the opinion? So God used us because we were willing to be faithful in that situation, but we would have missed the blessings that we're now seeing in a lot of these opinions if we'd have been intimidated off and not had the courage. And boy, in our cancel culture, I know that's true of all of you and your businesses, right? I mean, how many Fortune 500 companies these days can you be a basic biblical Christian and outspoken about that in any way and have a hope of rising? I mean, it's sad. Now, I think that's about to change because we're going to make it against the law in a very clear way in these opinions, but it's going to take courage, too, of people standing up and saying, God will take care of me. I'm going to be obedient. And the third thing I was just thinking about, and this is maybe more for younger people, but I think it's true for all of us. I was just thinking, when I first started out doing this stuff, I'm just kind of an old-fashioned kind of guy, and I thought, well, I just better do what God tells me to do. I just need to do it the right way. And even though I didn't think it was getting me anything, when people aren't watching, when you're doing stuff, I was like, I don't want to cut a corner. I want to do this the right way. And it was really because I just wanted to be faithful. What I didn't realize is 10, 15 years later, there's this process that sort of happens with your reputation. If you do it that way, something begins to happen. And doors start to open before you even ask them to be open. You start to get favor in so many ways. And so I just encourage you to be faithful and to do the right thing over and over again. And you won't realize what you're building up, but it'll come like a flood eventually, and you won't even believe the favor you're being given because you did that. The last thing I would say is listen to God. And I think most Christians don't do this. We kind of go to church and we do our thing, and then we don't really talk to God or listen to God at all during the week. And he's talking to us all the time. He's like arranging situations, giving us these incredible meetings, or 2 or 3 people are giving us the same phrase, and we're like blowing it off. And it's like, man, I'm trying to talk to you. Listen. And I could give you lots of examples, but I just want to give you one. It's my favorite. This is a little more dramatic. I've had a number of these too. But I found that the more you have these, the more you can hear the still small voice better and know what God's calling you to do. But when we went national, we were a Texas group for a number of years before we went national. I was like, I don't know how to find national fundraising people. I don't know anything about that. So I got a consultant. He said, the first thing you need to do is get 2 people to represent you around the country. He said, because you can't be everywhere to talk to people. And I said, okay. I said, what am I looking for? And he said, somebody with the heart of a pastor and the courage of a used car salesman. And I was like, I know some people like that, And I had 3 guys that I was like, this is going to be great. They're going to be wonderful. And they all fell through at the last moment. And so I'm sitting on an airplane flying to Houston. And, when you're in an airplane and you got your eyes closed and your head down, people don't know if you're praying or sleeping. Well, I'm praying. I'm saying, Lord, I'm just trying to follow your plan. Why did you give me 3 people and then pull them away at the last second? I'm just trying to be obedient. Just show me if there's something I need to know. I kid you not, I opened my eyes. The guy to my left across the aisle on the plane, who I'd never met in my life or ever talked to, tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned to him and he said, God wants you to know he's bringing you the people you need. And I just sat there kind of stunned, like drooling, and he said, you going through some sort of reorganization or growth plan? And I was like, yeah. And he said, God wants you to know it's going to be hectic, but it's going to come together. It's going to work really well. And then you're going to have a short time of rest. Still don't know who this guy was. I was so blown away. My wife's convinced it was an angel, but whoever it was, God used him. But you know what? I would have never had that dramatic moment if I hadn't asked God, please show me. And I think we miss these things all the time. We count things off to coincidence. I just say be in a conversation and listen to what God's telling you to do. And at least have your eyes and your ears open to what he might be leading you to do. And don't stiff arm it or slough it off, because those are some of the greatest things. There's nothing more fun than to see a train going that God is leading. And after a while, you start to recognize those and you say, I'm just jumping on. I recognize this. I've seen this before, and I'm jumping on. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now with these. Again, getting a Supreme Court case is like getting hit by lightning. We just got hit by lightning 3 times in 12 months, okay? That's not normal. So I know God's at work, and we're going to give him the glory, and we're going to do everything we can. Last thing I want to end with is this video, and I just want to show you because I'll tell you what afterwards in one sentence, and then we'll do Q&A and snide remarks. I know some of you. This is Gail Blair, one of our clients, slowly went blind and was a nurse and used to get to care for people. And then she said, what do I do now? I'm blind. I'm in an apartment across the street from the park. How do I do anything with anybody? And then it just hit her. That's it. I'll go to the park every day. I'll find my way across the street with my cane. I'll sit at a bench, and if somebody comes by, I'll talk to them, and I'll offer them a copy of the Gospel of John. And that's what she did until she was banned from the park for 2 years for talking about her faith at the park. So this is her story, and then I'll finish up.
Nursing was it for me. It was my identity. I did everything. If I could help them get a job or an apartment, my husband says that I am a frustrated social worker. January 7th, 1984, I actually had been going to a Bible study on the book of John, and it opened my heart to the Word of God being the answer, the truth. It was the best day of my life. I actually was born with a genetic disorder, retinitis pigmentosa, and I still continued nursing until I couldn't anymore because of my vision loss. If somebody ever said to me, hey, you could have your eyesight, but you have to, get rid of Jesus, I'd say, no deal. Wherever I go, I try to hand this out to people. So it's 21 chapters of the gospel. I get around with my cane to cross the street, to go in the park. Going into a park to talk with people is a pleasure, first of all, but knowing that eternal life is real and people don't know that they're in danger, people have been saved in the park. I've had more of a reaction from the staff in the park that was not too nice, like they would interrupt me. There's plenty of people to talk to. I don't have to be going after anybody. I couldn't. It would be a tripping hazard for me. I was sitting on a bench with a man that I was conversing with. The executive director comes over and he says that he was going to call the police. And that's the start of the 2-year ban, even from the library, which that was a little bit of a surprise to me, that they would ban me from both the park and the library on passing out one of the 66 books of the Bible that you have in your library that people can check out. I guess my heart is broken that I can't do what the Lord has told me to do. So if you want to say that I think about daily the lost souls. I think the Lord has positioned me right across from the park. It's a divine assignment that I absolutely need to fulfill. It's just a must.
Gail's a great example. I think one of the biggest lies we often believe is, I'm just one person. I'm not that powerful. What can I do? I mean, update to Gail is we won her case. Every month, I'd say on average, we get an email from Gail that somebody else has just accepted the Lord at the park. And the guy who turned her in is now considering coming to her church. She was just faithful, and that's really all we need to be. We're all gifted differently, but God wants to use all of us. So I just encourage you to think about Gail. If Gail can do it, then we can do it. And I'll say when we do Q&A, we'll have cards out on the table back there. Don and Steve are in here somewhere. If you're not getting our info, you can sign up. We will never give your information out to anybody else. We don't do that. But the only way you're going to see kind of what's going on is if you're on our list. You won't even know about a lot of these things otherwise. And so you can sign up the cards, and we'll be happy to add you onto the list. But thanks for letting me be with you, and I'm happy to do questions.
Wow, this is amazing, and we do want to just take a few moments before we close down to see if you all have a question or two, and while you're thinking of it, I'll just ask one. So you gave us case after case after case after case of these places where civil liberties, religious freedoms were being attacked, taken away. Do you have any sense of the driving force behind most? Is it driven by the people on the point who are philosophically, ideologically opposed, or is it people so afraid of getting in the middle of something that they just go, I just got to say this just to keep it all the way?
It's, I know the force behind it on a spiritual level is pretty obvious, right? But the force behind it, it's a mixture of things. Number one, as we move more towards nones, meaning no religion, there are people who have no appreciation for religious freedom, therefore it leads to more attacks. There are people who are anti-religious, like there are groups out there, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they're an atheist group. Their goal is to get rid of religion in America. There was just a poll recently with people, I forget what the age limit, it was like under 26, I think, where I think it was around 40% of those thought that religion was a negative force in our country. So this mindset leads to just not even understanding that if you're an atheist, you should be for religious freedom. So, but we see, and then the other thing we see sometimes is it's just a power thing, right? We'll come in, and whether it's a school district or a state or whoever, they're like, I'm the authority and you won't tell me what to do. And so they just double down. Take the Coach Kennedy case. 7 years they fought to make sure that Coach Kennedy couldn't go by himself and go to a knee after the game. Well, now there's $5.3 million in attorney's fees that they're responsible for. Why in the world? It would have been easy to, they wouldn't even sit down with us before the lawsuit to see if we could work it out to where Coach could pray in some way. So sometimes it's just sort of a prideful kind of, we're the government, we will tell you what to do. But there's also anti-religious forces, and they're just stuff through our culture that doesn't respect religious freedom. So it's a combination, I'd say.
How about you guys? Any questions? Yeah, right over there.
What religious freedom attacks do you see in Western Europe that we should anticipate coming
It's pretty similar. I think one that I watch a lot is I've got a friend who's a barrister out there in the UK, Paul Diamond. And he always says, what we have here, you're going to see in 3 or 4 years. And so you see some pretty bad things out there. They've had cases where they've banned anybody from being foster parents if they have biblical beliefs on LGBT that are different from the government's. There are some pretty extreme stuff that's happening, but I mean, it's coming so quick here, it's hard to even say that we used to be sort of 5 years apart. I think we're getting pretty close together, this global sort of, opinion way that people are supposed to think, and sort of this new wokeism religion that if you don't follow these new, things we're laying out, we're going to crush you. It's kind of weird. Wokeism is the worst religion I've ever seen because it's the only religion that doesn't allow anybody else to have their religion. It leads to a lot of really extreme things. But people get so sort of, myopic or they don't seem to care about anybody else. They're so into this mindset that everybody has to fall in line or you need to be destroyed because you're evil. Boy, what's so fascinating is the place that this battle is happening the most is in the workplace. It's a lot of these major corporations, and these DEI committees that they have and things where they come in and they say, you'll do this. And a lot of times the CEO don't necessarily like it, but they're scared to oppose it. And so it leads to a lot of really horrible cases that we're seeing of people who have been faithful for 20, 30 years and now being drummed out of their job because they can't sign something that they don't agree with. I think it's coming here quicker, and it seems to be things are more global, so they're not as delayed as they used to be, where we used to see things in the UK in 3 or 4 years, we'd see them coming here.
You over here?
Do you represent people of faiths other than Christianity or Judaism? For example, people of Islamic faith or Buddhism, or is there any faiths that you don't represent? That you say, wait a minute, it's not.
We've represented most faiths, Native American Indians, the Falun Gong, you name it, Buddhist. So lots of different ones. And, sometimes people will say, well, would you ever represent a Muslim? And we would say, to do what? I mean, they're thinking like the right of a Muslim to chop the head off of their wife. And we're like, no, we wouldn't take that case. That would violate the Constitution and criminal law and everything else. But if it's a Muslim who wants to pray, yeah, because their right to pray is everybody else's right to pray. And so that's kind of the way it works in religious freedom is they usually are not going to start with the majority religions that are powerful because they have political force behind them. They can go and sort of create problems for the people doing it. It's typically they'll start with somebody that has less power and then set the precedent and then try to build up from there, which is why we've always represented all faiths. And again, one of the groups most attacked these days are Jewish, Orthodox Jewish groups. You look in the newspaper, almost every day there's some attack, physical attack, on their synagogue. There was one just yesterday, I don't know if you saw, of a Molotov cocktail thrown into a synagogue. And so we're having to represent them in numerous cases around the country when other things that are a little more civilized are being attempted. They're being told that they can't have their building for their worship or whatever else. But and it's kind of fun. I mean, we represented a synagogue here locally a few years ago, and the rabbi was telling us a story. He said, I went to my synagogue, and they said, well, why are you going to the Gentiles to represent you at First Liberty? And he said, because they're the best. And I said, okay, so we came to you guys. And I was like, I love that. Good Samaritan, that's what it's all about. We all believe in religious freedom, whether we agree on the religion or not. The religious freedom itself is of great value. And I think that's what God would want. He wants people free to have a relationship with him the way that he dictates. And the last thing we need is the government telling us that. I mean, they're so good at everything that I think the last thing we need them is becoming in charge of our theology. So I think it's a great fight. And it's something everybody should be able to unite around. They should. People get lost in these things, but everybody should be in favor of religious freedom. And if they understood, I would hope everybody would. But it's one of those uniting issues, should be.
Maybe one more? Let me get one. Yeah, right there. Go ahead.
Are there any cases that maybe you didn't win in the past because the court was stacked against you that with the current makeup of the court is more friendly and supportive of upholding the Constitution and religious liberty that you want to revisit?
Yeah, there's a lot of cases that in the past have either been lost or, with our standpoint, we have a unique advantage because of our model of how we do litigation. Instead of us flying in from our office to, Idaho, we have the best lawyers in Idaho or at the best law firms who know the judges. So when we do a case, we're hopefully not going to file a case where we're going to get our head handed to us, right? We've done our homework and we know what we're doing and where to file. But there's going to be a lot of change after the Coach Kennedy case. It's the biggest religious liberty decision in, I think, 70 years, and people just don't know. Everything just changed, and people don't know. And so what that's going to cause is it's going to cause a lot more litigation to kind of figure out, okay, we know this old standard of sort of a hostility to religion is gone, but how does this new standard work, and what exactly is it? And we're going to have to work that out. For instance, what if a school decided to, reinstitute some sort of opening statement for the day? And some people pray during the opening statement. We could have, there was an old case on the teachers putting 10 Commandments on their wall along with other stuff, and that was declared unconstitutional. Would it be today? Probably not, depending upon the setting and what else was displayed. So there's just a lot of things that'll have to be worked out, which is why I say we're just at the beginning of, I think, a really good period. What's funny is if you'd have asked me 6 years ago, what are the 3 cases, if you could get rid of, that would be the greatest, advancement for religious freedom? I would have said number 1 would be the Lemon case, but as I said, we could never get rid of it. It's been cited 7,000 times. Well, it's gone. Number 2, I would have said the Smith case, which I won't get into all the details, but it really is it eviscerated about 80 to 90% of the protections for the free exercise of religion. We've got a case in the Supreme Court right now that would take care of that if they take it. They're holding it right now. We probably won't know till the summer whether they're going to take it. And then the third one would be a case called TWA versus Hardison, which really took religious freedom away in the workplace. And this case we just had them grant 3 weeks ago, Groff, is going to overturn TWA versus Hardison. So it's just amazing what's happening right now. And it's because we've got a court who is just going to what the Constitution says and what the statute says. And if stuff's not in the statute, then they're not making it up. And so it's incredible to be a part of what's going on, but we're just at the beginning of, I think, and why is God doing this? I don't know. Why is he giving us more religious freedom than we've ever had? Is there going to be a revival? I hope so. But if not, maybe we're just going to need the protection. But I know it's happening. So it's kind of fun to be a part of what God is doing right now. So I'd encourage you all, if you're not, get the info so you can pray for these cases and be a part of what God's doing.
How about another big hand for Kelly Shackelford? Wow, that was awesome.